everyone. So this is JelArts, and I'm doing a collaboration with one of my friends, MilanaMill, and she is another artist. And I would definitely recommend you go check out her work. She is really, really good. I'll put the link to all her social media in the description. So please go check out her art. And you'll hear my voice as well as her voice in this video. And there's going to be 2 parts. So this is part 1, and part 2 will be uploaded to her YouTube channel. So I'll link that in the description. So we decided to do a video together about tracing, and we wanted to talk about if it's okay or why people trace or when is it okay to trace. We just wanted to say right off the bat that this video is directed towards beginners, not professional artists, because we know a lot of professional artists use some methods of tracing to kind of like speed up their workflow, and we don't want to like bash that or anything, because that's a perfectly fine way to create art, just as long as you don't like lie about the way something was created. Every artist can do it their way. So we are just addressing beginners who want to learn to draw and are wondering about tracing, and wondering like the ethics behind tracing. Is it okay to trace? And just everything like that. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is tracing, copying, referencing, and like what are the differences, when should you use them? Because they're all kind of similar, but they kind of go from like tracing is like completely copying to referencing, which is the least amount of copying, but I'll explain that. There's 3 main ways to draw using a picture or a photograph or a drawing, and that's tracing, copying, and referencing, like I said. And tracing is pretty much when you have the photograph or the picture directly below your paper and you follow the lines on, like, use a light box or a window, and you completely make an exact replica of that picture. So it's exactly the same as the original, and you've just gone over and made lines on top of it, and it looks the exact same. And copying is when you draw a replica of an image, but you're not tracing it. So you're just using your eyes instead of having it actually directly below your paper. And copying is really useful for practicing, for learning anatomy, for doing studies, and I would actually really recommend this for practicing, because copying poses and trying to get the movement and without having it directly below, like without having a guide for you to follow, you're doing it all on your own just by looking at another picture, is a really good way to learn. So I would definitely recommend that. So copying is definitely a lot different from tracing, because tracing, you're literally going over the lines of the picture below it, where copying is when you are kind of looking back and forth between a picture and your paper and trying to make it look like the picture without tracing it. So it's definitely a much better way for learning copying. I would definitely recommend that. And lastly, referencing. And I would kind of describe referencing as something that you'd use if you're doing an actual finished drawing or finished illustration. It kind of goes along with the research part that goes into making drawings. So say you want to do a drawing of a cat. You might not necessarily know what a cat looks like, and if you want it in a certain pose, you might need to see a picture of a cat in that pose to get an idea of how to do it. So what I would do is go to Google Images and search for cat pose or cat action pose or something, and scroll down a bit and find multiple different pictures of the cat in different poses and kind of compile them all together, and that'll be like your reference images that you use for the drawing, and you kind of use bits and pieces from each image to kind of get an idea of how to draw the cat in that pose, and then you draw it your own way. That's kind of what referencing is. Referencing is like you're referring to something while you do something else. So you use those pictures as a kind of guide to like remember how exactly a cat's anatomy works, and then you kind of translate that into your drawing. So it kind of goes from the most intense form of copying to least intense, from tracing, copying, and referencing. And referencing and copying are both completely valid ways of learning and using photos. It's just that some people overcopy and then they claim the drawing as being theirs 100% original when they don't give credit to what their inspiration was or what picture they copied it from. It's really important to give credit where credit is due. It's definitely wrong to lie about where you got a piece of art from or where it came from. Like if you said, this is completely from my head, but you actually copied the pose from somewhere, it doesn't make you a lesser artist to use references or to copy. It really doesn't. It's actually a really good way to learn, and every artist uses references. Like, it's the only way to know how to draw something. You need to be able to see it to know how to draw it. The only way people know how to draw people is because they see people in their everyday life. So those are definitely completely valid forms of drawing. And tracing is where it gets tricky, because you're actually exactly copying something and you're not really doing it yourself, because you're copying the guideline of the picture that's right below your picture. So that's where it gets tricky, and that's what we're going to talk about in the rest of our video, of when we think tracing is okay, when should you trace, and like what you definitely what you should and shouldn't do when it comes to tracing. So I hope you enjoy the rest of the video.
So another question we got is when it's okay to trace. Now, tracing is actually a really good method if you have to save time. For example, if you're working on a big project, such as comics, or if you're a professional and you're working for a company for, say, concept art or background artwork or whatever it happens to be. In those cases, it's actually really beneficial to trace, because you have the set of time limit, like you have to schedule and you have to follow it pretty closely. Now, let's, for example, say that you are doing a comic, and you're not really a professional, just a hobbyist, but you still want to keep yourself on timely manner. Like, you don't want to go outside your schedule and, take take months to finish one page. In these kind of ways, tracing is really good, especially for things like background. And the way to trace these backgrounds, for example, is if you own the copyright to the thing that you are going to trace from. Let's say that you want to trace that background and you have a 3D model. Now, you made this 3D model yourself, so basically you own the copyright of that 3D model, and therefore it's totally okay if you trace over it. Now, if you want to trace over someone else's work, you have to make sure that you have the permission, okay? That you have the permission for the original artist. Say, if you want to trace over a photo, then you have to go to the original photographer and ask them if you can use their photo to trace over. Now if it's a free stock, free stocks are pictures that you can find if you just Google free stock, and those are the kind of pictures that allow you to use them. So you don't really need a permission from the original artist in order to use them. But they usually do come with certain kind of rules, like how you can use them and for what purpose. Say that if you want to use it for commercial purpose, say if you want to sell your comic, you have to make sure that the free stock that you're using allows that. In some cases, stocks are only allowed to use for personal use. For example, you can post them to your gallery, but you cannot sell them. Like, you cannot use them to make money. And there are ways, such as buying the license or paying the royalties for the stock if you want to make money. Usually, if you find the original site, it's very important to check your sources. Otherwise, you're going to get yourself in the really sticky situation. But if you find the original source of the stock, they usually specifically have the rules on how you can use them. And they usually even have an option where you can pay for the use of the stock if you just want to. Paying for a license basically means one-time purchase, okay? While, for example, if you buy a game, it's a one-time purchase, you buy it, you own it, basically. That's what a license is. Now, royalties are basically like a monthly subscription where you have to pay like every month for 1 year, a certain amount of money in order to use the picture. And those are really important things to know, because if you just take a picture from Google and say trace over it, you can get yourself into serious legal troubles. That's why for example, many professionals actually do trace if they do have like big projects, like they're working for companies or they have their own comics or, videos or whatever they are doing. Usually these people, if they trace from others, they work very closely with the lawyer so that they know what they're doing. They have the license, like they do purchase the license to use the pictures or pay the royalties. And it's very important to know, because many people seem to think that, oh, professional artists do it, so it's okay if I do it. But you have to realize that these artists, they work with the lawyers, they know what they can do and they know what they cannot do. And they usually have the small amount of money. It doesn't actually cost a lot to buy a license, though the royalties are gonna get a little bit more expensive. And, so that's something that people really need to learn about tracing. Now, another important thing that I actually want to say about tracing is that tracing, for example, again, let's talk about comics, and you want to trace a background. Tracing should never be a replacement for the skill. Like, you shouldn't trace backgrounds because you cannot draw backgrounds. If you're gonna draw backgrounds, you gotta learn how to do them. So the best, in order to get the best out of tracing and do it in legal ways, is to always check your sources, know what you're doing, who you are tracing from, have a permission, and also, if you get a permission, make sure you have a proof of that. Take a screenshot, ask them to write the permission. It's really important that you have something to show for if someone else asks. But there are also a couple of ways that you can trace without the needing of a permission, or without you needing to have a permission or a license or something. There are those kind of ways where you can do it legally without any of those things. But the problem is that even copyright has its loopholes, okay? And if you're careless, you're gonna fall into one of these loopholes very easily. So just because a professional artist does something, I wouldn't go and do exactly how they do. So if you see someone doing something and you want to do that same thing, it's always better to ask first so that you are sure. But yeah, other than that, I don't think there's much else to say. I really hope that you guys enjoyed this video, and bye!
I just want to say thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed hearing our opinions about tracing so far. And make sure you watch part 2. Will be on Milana's channel. It'll be linked somewhere here. So I hope you enjoyed the speed paint and our opinions, and I'll see you in part 2.